Today we can understand today is raining, cold, all the hurdles are here, but still we are privileged. You are here, you could make it. Thank you so much for coming for today's session. Now, today we will be talking about changing global power dynamics and policy options for Pakistan. So, one or two things which I want to put in front of you before that we start our today's presentation or today's lectures. We are not focused. Number one, we are not focused on US-Iran conflict. Be mindful. We are not focused on US-Iran conflict. Our focus is generally what is happening at the global level. Iran and US conflict is one of those things, and there are a number of things that are happening in MENA region. If you talk about other parts, right, Latin America, if you talk about other part of the world, so a lot of things are happening. The most recent phenomena you can see from France, so where the yellow vest has entered 62nd week, continuously they are protesting there. So number of things are happening around the world. So on one side there are conflict, on other side there is a fight between people who have and who doesn't have. So there is a fight. The people, when we talk about the French, so there are people who are protesting for equality, for more wages, for more comfortable life, for a better lifestyle. If you talk about the Venezuela, people are fighting for democracy. So they are talking about it's not a democracy which we are living. We have to fight for the democracy. And then there's some propaganda wars in the Central Asia, in the China. So what is happening? Well, the propaganda has been initiated there. So number of things are happening at the global level. So Pakistan have a stake one way or another. If we talk about in the MENA region, we have very good friends like Arab countries, like Iran, like other countries. When we talk about Central Asia, we have historical linkages. Then our close friend, ally, brother, China is here. So number of things are happening. So in this context, we have organized this session. So that's why the reason is I'm putting in front of you because these days, most of the time when we talk about the policy or the diplomatic fronts at the global level, so we talk about US and Iran. So that's not the topic of today. We are talking about the broader spectrum. So what is happening at the global level? So with these remarks, I would like to request first of all my colleague, Ms. Ayesha Ilyas, Research Associate at SDPI, to give a welcome note.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. Shakeel Saab said that we are not discussing Iran-US relations, but if we are discussing policy options for Pakistan, we have to focus on the developing situation in our neighborhood. US-Iran relations are so complex that they have kept the region on their toes for more than 7 decades now, approximately 7 decades. And the murder of the Qasem Soleimani is a most recent episode in this saga. Now, historically, Pakistan has been a bad guy in such situations. And it's mainly because of the geography of the country, which does not allow it to be a good guy. The strategic geography and economic dependency of the country on foreign support still would not allow Pakistan to remain neutral, but it has also experienced the cost of taking sides. So how will it develop policy towards the situation is something we need to discuss today, and which we look forward to our panelists to give us some policy suggestions on. So far, with Iran's restrained and calculated response, the threat of an immediate and direct confrontation are fading. But the speculations of a slow and indirect response from Iran are very much alive, and which makes the situation even more complicated. And even if we argue that Iran right now is not in a position to conduct nuclear tests, which will actually create a situation around the whole scenario, we cannot rule out the possibility of Iran activating or supporting its proxies in the region. A most important one of which is the Houthi rebels in the neighborhood of Saudi Arabia in Yemen, and for which Soleimani himself have paved the grounds throughout his service with the Quds forces. Another element which is very important and directly related to Pakistan is the revival of global terrorism. As we see, the strategist of Soleimani's stature is no more in the picture, and Baghdad has demanded withdrawal of US forces from Iraq, and there is a pause in the operation of the anti-ISIS international coalition. So the grounds look quite favorable for the revival of ISIS, which pose a threat to Pakistan in multiple ways, one of which is Pakistan is seeking stability in Afghanistan for CPAC, which will actually go in a stalemate if the region is unstable and uncertainties keep growing around the situation in Iran or the global terrorism. Second thing is, if there is a situation on the western side of the country, Pakistan will have to reduce its forces or reduce its attention from the eastern side, where there is a simmering conflict with India as well. And India, within its border, is battling with an internal situation which can find a good opportunity in the shifting attention from from Kashmir and find a national enemy for itself. So there are a few questions that I would want to put in front of our panelists. And the foremost is, what do we see for Pakistan in the days coming? Will it be able to balance the internal pressures with the international pressures? And in this scenario, what is the fate of Pakistan, the Afghanistan and US withdrawal from the country? Secondly, what will be the cost of diversion of attention from Kashmir for Pakistan? Thank you.
Thank you, Ayesha, and giving a brief and a comprehensive welcome note. Definitely, Iran is one part of the global picture that would come, but our main focus would not be Iran. So Iran would be focused, but not the main focus. We will be talking about the global picture. So with that, I would like to request now Mr. Haroon Shareef. You know him very well. He wears so many caps. He was with the international development agencies like World Bank, DFI, bilateral agencies like DFID. Then he was part of the government as a state minister for Board of Investment, and he played extremely well there when he was a minister for Board of Investment. I think he was the man behind who helped Pakistan to revise or to gain some momentum in ease of doing business. Although later on many people took claim of that, but he was the main person who was doing this stuff. So with the respect of that, today we have invited him. The reason is he has the taste of the government, he has a taste of development partners. So he can bridge the gap, the thinking between when they're talking about as a development practitioners and international organizations and the state. So he can bring some correlation between the policies of those all players. And most importantly, we will like to hear from him. So how the global economic diplomacy will play a role. So when we're looking at the conflict and the building the new relations. Mr. Haroon Shareef. You have 20 minutes.
Thank you, Shakeel, very kind, and Ayesha for the setting the stage, and I welcome all of you here. I called SDPI that the weather was not too friendly, so do you really want to go ahead? But they said people will show up. I'll try and put things in context, whatever has been said here, with my little experience. A couple of things I think which define what's happening globally, and I will take more of economic perspective. So number one is there is a shift of economic gravity from unipolar to multipolar. So what you are defining, this is happening within this lens. So there will be what numbers tell us that by the year 2050 there will be multiple centers of economic powers, and most of them are going to be in Asia. So that is basically what we are looking at. So whenever there is a shift of power, normally that transfer is not that smooth, and the turbulence which we are seeing is very clearly linked to that. So when I look at some of the top 20 economies, different analysis in year 2015, so I see 6 or 7 Asian countries led by China, which will be the number 1 economy in the world. I see in that gap a number of European countries slip out of the top 15 in next 20, 30 years. That's the kind of numbers. So I think our colleague is here, so I'll take a 30-second pause to. We can give credit to Rain and others. So what I was saying was that this transition which is happening in the world is that multiple power centers, particularly economic power centers, are likely to emerge. So that's number one. Second part, obviously, is that, this flux or this transition, there is a unanimous, analysis that Asia's century will be the next economic century. Linking to that, Pakistan has always been at the center, at least for the past 30, 40 years, of global geopolitics, particularly linked to South Asia and Western Asia there. So what we had started to look at Pakistan and others were 2, 3 signals in the past, 10 years or so. Number one was that Pakistan started showing signs of getting out of the internal and external conflict, which was the lens used to look at Pakistan for the past several years. And that was a very positive thing, and people took it, welcomed, and I must give credit, like my friend Anatol Levin, who wrote about it, and he talks about that how Pakistan got out of the existential threat of, terrorism and extremism and conflict. Second thing, when I joined the government recently in 2018, we were very clear that let's start engaging with the neighbors with an economic lens instead of the geopolitical lens. And I must give credit to the Prime Minister that he was extremely committed to that, and he opened many doors for Pakistan, where people started showing interest from the economic lens that we wanted partnerships. And let me confess, this Prime Minister. So what I would like to, and since we are all, trying to debate this, the point I'm trying to make here is that once you shift the gears of partnership with the neighbors, you need a lot of preparation. And I must admit, I would call it a mistake that what we did not offer was that perhaps the entry point was longer term foreign direct investment partnership. Because Pakistan went into the fiscal troubles, we took the lens of bailing us out. And there is a price to that, obviously, which is becoming more and more visible at this point in time. So what happened was that the preparation on that front was limited, excitement was high, and lots of countries started showing interest, and we did get some flows of money in us, on our side. If we look at Pakistan, because the question is raised that in this changing world, how do we position Pakistan? So basically, neither our foreign policy colleagues were ready to deal with our neighboring countries with the lens of economic partnerships, because the training was missing. For years and years, they had dealt, with the geostrategic lens. B, our institutions here in the government were not actually ready to fast track these partnerships. So on both counts, the longer term economic stake, which ensures stability in the region, Pakistan is still struggling to even, materialize one transaction on that side. It's always very easy to get, cash transfers in our system, but actually getting a large economic transaction like a project, like getting it done is a bigger challenge for Pakistan. The other shift, I think, which I would like to highlight is that we have seen for years and years our linkage with multilateralism and the multilateral financial institutions who have been financing developing countries, and particularly Pakistan. I do see, while I see the multiple centers of economic gravity coming up, I also see multiple centers and pools of capital emerging within the region. So if I see, I can name 4 or 5. So we have seen the emerging of a new multilateral bank called Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is based in China. We have seen pools of capital coming through sovereign wealth funds of Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and others who have availability of money for countries like Pakistan. We have seen the Silk Road Fund, the New Bank, and others. So it's not only the Bretton Woods anymore who will be providing money to this region. But for that, countries need to have a very clear policy focus to take that forward and have new partnerships done. So what happened in Pakistan? So if we look at, this whole transition of multiple centers of power emerging, new financial centers also, repositioning themselves or positioning in Asia. Asia remains the center of power. So what had happened in Pakistan was that with CPEC, Pakistan had given a very clear signal that a huge infrastructure investment will be welcomed here. But what we see today, to be very honest, is that again Pakistan is struggling to balance between the fund program, the CPEC, our regional partners, where I was part of it, where we had opened doors. So I actually see, Pakistan in terms of having a very clear policy position of economic diplomacy. Again, my fear is that Pakistan might end up using its strategic position to get some economic gains. Now that, I would say, a mistake we have been doing for years and years, because that is always a short-term position, which puts us in a fiscal trouble time and again. So I would like, how much time do I have? 10 more minutes? Excellent. So what, Jay?
You are very articulate.
No, thank you very much. So I just wanted to put the picture. Now, coming back to, now, in this particular situation, what, as an economist or a public policy person, my worry has been that how can Pakistan and rest of South Asia catch up with the emerging Asian century? Now, that's a question which all of us should be asking ourselves. Because if East Asia has already developed, Southeast Asia is catching up. China will be the #1 economy. So the only region where I see slow development towards that path is Pakistan, Iran, part of Central Asia, and now part of Middle East, which are getting turbulent. So how can this particular part of Asia can catch up is the question which I used to raise at the public policy level, at international forums. I recently addressed Beijing and Doha forums, and that's where we debated this thing, that how can, this region catch up. For that, there are a couple of things I would like to highlight in the context of Pakistan. We read a lot, and I would not like to repeat, that how Pakistan is dealing with the economy. Unfortunately, our economic policies for a number of years have focused on only two things. Number one is how could we be the good clients to international institutions to borrow money. So all the ratings we look at, all the actions we do are linked to borrowing more and more funds, particularly from multilateral institutions. Second part is that our interventions to spur growth are linked to our fiscal and monetary policies only. So if you look at it still, and that is where the trouble lies. Pakistan has basically, particularly the fiscal position of a country is linked to state. It has very little to do with private sector. So our policies have been that you basically balance the book, so that we can borrow more, so that lenders can look at it more favorably. And on a lighter tone, when I joined, to be very honest, because PTI had taken control for the first time, they did not even know that without an IMF program, the other multilaterals will not give us money. So when I explained this to the Prime Minister and Finance Minister, they said, oh really? And then they started looking at the IMF program far more seriously, because previously they thought that it was just the flow of funds they needed, and others will give money. So so experience counts. So when our response to our exports, when our response to our job creation will be fiscal in nature, I think we lose the key things which rest of Asia did. That is what they have done, is they have strengthened their global competitiveness, where they are competitive. And I'll give example here of two cities in Pakistan which I have seen. Our solution to our problems are structural. And I think time and again people have mentioned that in this changing world, you cannot grow unless and until you double your exports. So the answer is structural, that if you don't have competitiveness, you cannot double it. And we have seen countries doubling it, in past 10 years. The problem, the others, I will highlight two, three, just to make my case. Other structural problem is that we are still struggling with the thought that should state run enterprise or get out of it. It's been past, 20, 25 years, this ideological debate is going on. What do we do to PIA? What do we do to steel mill? What do we do to state-owned enterprises? Should we keep it? Should we restructure it? Should we sell it? Now, that's a structural problem where a nation has to build consensus and take a decision. Otherwise, the bleeding will continue. Confusion bleeds more and more. So that's a structural issue here. How do we deal with our energy mix? That's a structural issue here. Do we really want to revive growth? If we want to revive growth, who are the three champions of growth where we have comparative advantage? That's a structural decision which I can. If you take a decision, some people are bound to die and some people will flourish. But sooner or later, countries will have to take a decision. Now I will link this to the very particular our current situation here. So I think what has happened is that all the focus has gone back to the fiscal management of this country and the monetary policy. What it will do is the year ahead in 2020, it will give us better picture on the book that we will have some reserves, we will have some stability, we will not be perhaps Moody's or somebody with increase our credit rating, which has been sold as an economic revival. It is basically a revival of your capacity to borrow. And I see growth perhaps picking up between 3 to 4% in the next year or two. And then, by the time this 39-month IMF program is complete, this particular government will be in the next election cycle. And they will get 1 year of spending again. And I guarantee you, because of the politics of realpolitik of this country, a lot of spending will be done in the last year. And when the next government comes, the history tells us that we will be in the same twin deficit fiscal crisis. Now that's what the history tells us. So we have a couple of years and we should think that what can be done differently, which we have not done for the past 30 years. So I have highlighted certain, structural issues, and I would like to see now that I have seen, the public policy side being part of the team. I genuinely believe that Pakistan needs a different mindset. If Asia is growing and we have, so we need to start looking at revival of growth. So unless and until Pakistan looks at the champions of growth and revival of growth, at this point in time, let me, there are lots of misconceptions among people, among media, among public policy makers, that the Treasury or Ministry of Finance leads growth. It does not lead growth across the globe. So at this point in time, I really don't see Pakistan that who will champion the revival of growth. So we need to do some structural shift in our institutional arrangement, and we need to have one czar that this person will lead growth, be it the deputy prime minister or a minister and whoever. That's how other countries have done it. Treasury's job actually is to balance the book and collect the taxes and redistribute it, not to make the growth policy. Second point which I want to do is that we need to basically, the world will start believing in us if we shift from these short-term cash flows, what we call hot money, either from institutional investors or partner countries, to bridge the gaps. We need to show that we are capable of attracting longer-term foreign direct investment. And for that, my advice to government was and still is that please pick up 3 projects, let's say $500 million each, and demonstrate that Pakistan can actually do it in an international manner so that people get confidence. All the FDI large projects of the past 20 years have either gone in arbitration or policy distortions, or some kind of a dispute. So people really don't trust that policy is going to support that. Do we have the dispute resolution system? So the only thing is, rather than fixing the system, we need to use a model to fast track it and insulate it from the current bureaucracy. And that's how I can give examples of tens of countries how they have done it, so they could fast track it. So that's my second option in 2020, looking at this fast track. We should be very careful about gauging our capability to deliver, because it's, as a politician, people like to make lots of promises, but the country's capacity to deliver on these fronts have really eroded. So my advice to the government again is that pick up one structural issue. And I think the hottest issue to me would be state-owned enterprises, and demonstrate in next 1.5 years that we are serious about it and we can fix it. So, sell it out through privatization, 4 or 5 units, hand out to managers, whatever you want to do. But at least that talk should now lead towards some actions so that people start believing that we could, do a few things there. And finally, I would say that I really, really worry on Pakistan's debt situation, particularly the political economy of international debt will not let us think about these things, because our capability, we will continuously be focusing on our fiscal issues, that how to raise more taxes, how to basically build reserves, and then, the whole mindset will be revolving again and again, and multilateral money will come in. I genuinely think that Pakistan's capital market is capable of raising lots of local currency. If you all think, when was the last time when Pakistan's stock market raised some new capital? All the governments, all the private sector, all the others, we go to international sources of funds rather than trying to look at our own saving system. So Pakistan needs to start generating some capital within the country so that which can complement international sources. And finally, I'll close on this remark. I don't think that Pakistan's picture is bleak or negative. My only worry is that the potential this country has and the timing of emerging Asia, we might be much slower in catching up to rest of South Asia. When I look at economic growth in the rest of South Asia, so most of our competitors are growing at 6 to 7% per annum. If Pakistan continues to grow between 3 to 4%, our negotiating power in the region vis-a-vis the rest of the world, I think the dynamics would change. And we need to stop thinking that somebody like a World Bank or China will come and make my policy and get it done. They have never done it. They will never do it. We need to start thinking about these things indigenously in Pakistan so that we can take it forward. Otherwise, Pakistan's bargaining power or negotiation power, this will remain the same security-led, geostrategic-led, other things, not the economic-led, which our competitors are very rapidly catching up. So this is how I see the next couple of years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Haroon Sab. Wonderful talk. I think you have highlighted the most important issues which Pakistan is facing. Either we have to go for a security-led policy vision or the economic-led policy vision. I think this is the wonderful analysis. Now, I would like to request Dr. Hippler. So he is a country head of FES. FES doing work in Pakistan for a quite long time and in multiple sectors. As Mr. Haroon Shareef said, in the region, so we are lagging behind in the policy, in the economic development and economic growth. As your organization is working in this area, in this region, Central Asia and other parts, so we would love to hear from you. So what you think, what Pakistan should do in these circumstances, and how Pakistan can catch up those countries?
Well, Thank you very much for the invitation. I was quite impressed with the topic, changing global power dynamics, because very often when I'm in Pakistan, which I have been for more than 30 years now, people in Pakistan discuss their direct neighbors, Afghanistan, India, and currently China. But having a global perspective, that is something which I found innovative and important. Having said that, I would like to dodge your question because, I didn't come to Pakistan to lecture Pakistanis about their own country. There is this kind of thing. When I was, then it's probably 30 years ago when unification happened. I was, as an academic, helping ABC News in New York to prepare a show on some German topic, which doesn't matter now. And then when suddenly the guy came from New York City to take over, the journalist doing the film, he didn't speak a word of German. He had never been in Germany, and he had no idea very much. But as soon as he left the airplane, he lectured me about my country. And my German is pretty well developed. I have a PhD in political science. I wrote books about political things. So I told me, well, Jochen, you will never be as crazy and stupid as this American gentleman. Don't travel abroad lecturing people. So what I'm going to do is I will talk the first part, and then I still will connect it to some ideas in a humble mind, but not with this intention of telling Pakistanis what they should do.
It's good to have a different view, because we always have some bias to the Pakistan, but you can give us a very genuine view.
Well, but I have met so many Westerners who behave like colonial officers. I'm a bit touchy here, so okay. Having said that, let me just talk about the global, the changing global power dynamics. And probably to make it simple, there are two things that I briefly want to touch upon. One has already been mentioned briefly, Mr. Haroon Shareef, before. One is obviously a long-range trend from a bipolar political system to a unipolar political system, now to a multipolar political system, meaning that we have had a situation where in the Cold War there were two antagonistic kind of power blocks, one led by the United States, obviously, the other one led by the Soviet Union, which provided coercion and also stability in a sense. And with the breakdown of the Soviet Union, this, bilateral, this is kind of, bipolar system obviously broke down. If you have two pillars and one pillar breaks away, you are left with one. So for one historic moment, maybe for 20 years, the United States of America was the only remaining superpower and had a kind of unipolar dominance. The Soviet Union was weak. China wasn't still there where it is today. Europe was not very dynamic. Japan also had lost dynamics. So there was a situation where for 15, 20 years there was just one hegemonic power left, which again was unpleasant for quite a few reasons. If you have been the president of Iraq a couple of years ago or others, you wouldn't like this American dominance. But at the same time, again, it provided a degree of stability. Pro-American stability, but still stability. And now this is dissolving. The American leadership role is ending in a sense. It's still the biggest or most important actor globally for the next, 20 years maybe. But it is not even close to dominate the system as it was before, either on this unipolar or on this bipolar kind of structure. We could cite economic figures, but we also can, and to save time, we just stick to some political changes. If you compare the current president of the United States, and you compare presidents 20, 30, 50 years ago, I'm afraid that the former economic advisor of President Trump is right, that this currently the country is led by a clown surrounded by monkeys, meaning it's not a serious, predictable superpower policy. They lost weight in economic and political terms, but the weight that they are remaining, they are wasting by unpredictability and by behavior which is not accepted by many people outside the United States. So we see this kind of thing. To finish this aspect, what is the result? The result is that many countries that might or might not include Pakistan could gain a broader range of political freedom to act themselves without being disciplined in the bipolar or in the unipolar system. So there is some bigger degree of freedom. At the same time, it means that predictability and stability has been reduced. What we are seeing now, when we have not one or two, but 5 or 6 or 8 power centers, is that we have more power competition than we had before. Before, in the last 20 years, the power competition was not a good idea because it was clear that one superpower is dominating, and it was not very promising to resist that, as Saddam Hussein and as the Taliban and others have learned. Before, the same thing with two. But now, the growing number of rising powers means that competition among these rising powers will rise, and at the same time that the rules who do deal with these competitions have been weakened. They are not completely accepted any longer. That might get us back to the 19th century, where a competition of 6 or 7 regional or then global powers produced military crisis and political crisis, which were killing a couple of million of people in different parts of the world. That is one thing which could be a little bit frightening, despite the fact that it is increasing the room for maneuver for regional powers very much. The thing to add to this is that the frightening aspect has also to do with a cultural shift. You know, after the Second World War, the discourse globally was about international law, the United Nations, human rights, and other things which people thought are worth building on and strengthening. Now, remember, we have a man in the White House who is behaving in the way which is very often negating all these values. We have Mr. Putin in the Kremlin, we have Mr. Erdogan in Ankara, we have Bolsonaro in Brazil, who may be even worse than the ones mentioned before. We have Duterte in the Philippines, and we have Boris Johnson in London, who lies to his own voters in a chronicle way. I could go on forever. And that is something, if I combine this global change of power in the sense of fragmenting power, more competition and power, at a moment where it became fashionable to lie and cheat and be racist and do all kinds of silly things, which we thought would be behind us a couple of years ago. This combination isn't really nice, and we have to think about what it means for Pakistan in the next stage. You know, China obviously rising it's a big opportunity for Pakistan, as we will talk, but also not completely without problems, as we probably will see. Okay, the next point briefly is we are not supposed to talk about, Iran, or maybe we are, or about.
But not the focus.
No, it's not the focus. But I just want to add to what I just said on the global scale, that we also have an increased competition and confrontation in the Middle East and South Asia. You know, before, under the American hegemony or under the Cold War, it was kind of stabilized. Now, as we know, we have the war in Syria, we have on and off war in Iraq, we have a terrible war in Libya, We have the situation which in parts of Europe we are not supposed to call war in Afghanistan. And in many other countries we have huge potential of conflicts. We do have Iran, which is now completely unstable in a big situation. We have Algeria. We have this. I don't want to waste our time going through them one by one, but stability is gone on the one hand, and on the other hand, what we have is that the competition is now between not just Saudi Arabia and Iran. That is simple. We also have Saudi Arabia and Qatar, right, which both are Wahhabi. We have a conflict between Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Remember, for Pakistan, the conference in Malaysia where the Prime Minister first agreed to go and then because of pressure from Saudi Arabia couldn't go. We have conflict with Russia and Turkey. We have all kinds of regional conflicts which involve mostly Iran, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf Emirates, and Turkey, and then regional allies, including militias on the ground. Some of these conflicts are now interstate. When General Soleimani was killed, one of his roles in Syria and Iraq and Yemen is building Shia militias which are not under the control of the state, which again is a new thing in the region, which in the Cold War or in the American would have been very difficult. So these are the two things where Pakistan has to place itself. And the last 3-4 minutes I have, let me just come to some personal remarks. What do I think? Okay, in the past, my impression was that Pakistan has not always interpreted its own interest very well, in the sense that in Afghanistan, for instance, it has supported groups for tactical reasons because of India mostly, that at the end were not exactly pro-Pakistani and which created more problems than they solved. My impression is this policy happened more than once, and I just hope that this tactical thinking from regional perspective is ending now, but I'm not completely sure. You can maybe convince me that it is. That is something which was one of the key policy. I talked to several generals, to several analysts for many, many years. That was something which seems to be at the center of Pakistani regional policies, and I think it didn't work. Then obviously there is this threat perception fascination with India, which since the partition obviously is the key foreign policy problem, but also a psychological problem because India and Pakistan are not that different, let's face it, except from southern India. So this is the very thing. And now what is then the latest thing is the role of China for Pakistan. What I think the Chinese policies, which are probably more tactical than strategic, present a very important chance to Pakistan. It's lots of $60 billion is money, is real serious money to helping improve something. What I'm a little bit concerned about is that in the Pakistani discussion, still there is a lack of appreciation what it means. Big powers, the Americans, Great Britain when it was still a power, the Soviet Union, China, German Empire before. Great powers are never nice to their neighbors if it's not useful. Great powers don't respect rights. And the more stronger China will get, the more it will behave like a normal big power. That is nothing against China. It happened to the Britons, it happens to the Germans, it happened to the Soviets and to the Americans. Big powers are dangerous neighbors. And China is on a way where today it still is not, generally speaking, except in South China Sea, maybe, some places. But basically, the more the rise of China will continue, the more selfish and less respectful of other people's rights it will be. That's not a criticism of China, it's a criticism of big power policy. You know, it has happened in the last 3,000 years, but I'm not wasting our time, give you example. And my impression is that in many cases in Pakistan, China now is seen like the Americans were seen before. You mentioned to that in a way, they will solve our problems. Trust me, they will not. The Americans did never solve Pakistan problems, and the Chinese will not solve Pakistan's problems. The Chinese will solve Chinese problems, and anything else would be very selfish and very strange. You know, it's not their jobs to solve our problems. The Chinese will not solve German problems. They will not solve Pakistani problems. But many Pakistani friends who have seemed to believe that it is the case. And this is something which will lead to conflict later. You know, love, illusion of love, which will be disappointed, later lead to conflict and to, my parents had a terrible divorce, and I'm not hoping that Pakistan and China will get one of those, you know. So what I mean is, my suggestion is that Pakistan should use the advantages that the Chinese opportunity brings, but they shouldn't be naive about reasons and about context. The same thing like before the naivety which the American money was thought it's friendship. It's not friendship, it was business, political business, and economic business. And why should Chinese be very different from it? They are not, they are human beings. Okay, so that is something where my suggestion really is to use it, but not to fool yourself. And the final remark that I have is probably linking very much what you said. The future of Pakistan and the policy options for Pakistan are not abroad. They are not in Afghanistan. They are not in China. They are not in Washington. The policy options of Pakistan are decided whether you are able to build this country as a functioning governance system which actually works. Yeah. If the governments, plural, if the governments of Pakistan manage to take this society, take the opportunity that it presents, the richness of resources and of people, and manage to organize it in a way that it actually works for its own people, then there will be many options also abroad that you can take. But if Pakistan is not able to develop into a functioning, rationally and progressive organized governance system, talking about using options is a waste of time, because Pakistan would not have the instruments to utilize them. You know, like moderating between Iran and Iraq. Iran and Saudi Arabia, or between the Americans and Iran. This is wishful thinking as long as Pakistan is not something which is reliable, stable, and being taken serious even in Washington, even if the president doesn't know what Pakistan is. Some people there should really. That is something, the choice, the options that Pakistan has internationally economy, international politics, and international strategic things, I think to 90% they are in the hand of whether it's possible that Pakistan becomes a stable country with a government system serving their own people instead of a bunch of people. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Hippler. So you did not dodge my question. Basically, you answered my question in detail. But there are a couple of things I want to say before we move to Ambassador Basit. First of all, I think Pakistan have quite graduated from the India-centric politics. If you look at our last two elections, nobody talk about India. But in India, they are still obsessed. I don't know why. Even after their CA bill, so they are still obsessed with Pakistan. So if they don't find any other thing, so they want to mention Pakistan. And second thing, you may be right if you look at the history of superpowers, so they have their own thinking. But I think the difference of China from the other superpower is, China more talk about the harmonious and the prosperity. So that is a difference. So if they talk about the China dream, not Chinese dream, like the American dream, they talk about China dream. So that is a different thinking. So from individual to the collectivism. So maybe that would be different from the past. So with these remarks, I would like to request from Mr. Ambassador Basit Khan Sahab. He needs no introduction. He is a now well-known anchor person right now, and he is expert on the diplomacy, and he also headed a policy institute. So, sir, so you have listened to very different point of view. One is economy, other is the politics. So I can say political economy. So now there is a time how you bridge the, you use the diplomacy to facilitate these two pillars.
Thank you very much, Shakeel. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, my apologies for being late. When I was representing Pakistan in Germany for over 3 years, I thought Germany can help solve Pakistan problems. But only if we were to learn from Germany. But unfortunately, we never learned anything, and hence we are still in the deepest of quagmires, and we do not know how to get out of that. But I hope we can here speak frankly and honestly rather than mincing words. What would you suggest? Because I'm very critical these days. Okay. Okay, that is encouraging. So let me begin by saying that, as someone once said, that diplomacy is the art of agreeing on the feasible in order to advance the desirable. Agreeing on the feasible in order to advance the desirable. Unfortunately, in the case of Pakistan, I do not these days see any relations between feasibility and desirability. And it pains me to say that Pakistan these days lacks, as far as diplomacy is concerned, foreign policy is concerned. We lack strategic vision, tactical finesse and clarity, and organizational capacity. Hence, most of the time, we end up being whimsical, resort to ad hocism, and do most of the things for domestic optics. And here, in my view, is the crux of the problem in Pakistan. My friend from Germany mentioned about Kuala Lumpur summit. That is one recent example as to how our diplomacy has been working. I can also mention our relations with India, our very patchy diplomacy on Jammu and Kashmir since August 5. Our foreign minister is currently on a trip abroad to find some space for Pakistan to kind of promote some reconciliation. In my view, that is a highly ill-conceived visit, ill-conceived and ill-prepared trip. Then you look at the way we are handling FATF, Afghanistan, our relations with even China, the way we are handling CPAC. There is no clarity as to how to go about our relations with the US. So overall, the only thing which gives me some satisfaction and some hope is that during the last 1 year or so, Pakistan has been able to regain some of the lost space in Saudi Arabia and UAE. And that may also turn out to be transactional if we do not inject some sanity and some purpose into that relationship, or willing to push it beyond a certain point. If we become complacent, then I'm sure that whatever gains we have made in the last 1.5 years, even those gains would be lost. Why I'm saying all these things? Because after having worked in the Foreign Office for almost 36 years and representing Pakistan from places like Moscow to Yemen, and Yemen to New York, and London, and Geneva, and many other places, and ending with New Delhi, obviously. I am somewhat, and this has always been the case. I'm not really critiquing this government. Unfortunately, the earlier governments too have not been able to put much sense into our diplomacy. Hence, there has always been firefighting. I'm in the process of writing something, so that I can enumerate up to countless incidents where it becomes clearly manifested how our diplomacy works. Now, I will give you one or two examples, recent examples. Before the elections in India last year, Modi was the man who could who was being seen as the man who could resolve the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. And our Prime Minister went out of his way to say that we are looking forward to the re-election of Prime Minister Modi. That is never done in diplomacy. But all of a sudden, after 5th of August, he becomes fascist and, representative of Nazism. So to me, as a diplomat, I'm still puzzled as to what to say about whether Mr. Modi, whether we did not know before 5th of August as to what the RSS was all about. Didn't we know as to what the BJP agenda was? So I'm perplexed as to how we really work in a country like Pakistan, which is a nuclear country and more than a population of 200 million people. You take Jammu and Kashmir. We have been, after the 5th of August, we went all guns, blazing, that we would do this, we would do that. But I can tell you that even today, there is simply no work plan as to how to deal with the situation in a clear-cut manner. What is our strategy and how that strategy is complemented by tactics. So there is nothing on the table as to, it is all, we are dealing with this issue in fits and starts. One day our Prime Minister, our Foreign Minister, they wake up, they have a tweet somewhere, they have statements issued that we would continue supporting the people of Jammu and Kashmir diplomatically and morally and politically. Then the problem with this government in particular is that they're playing to the domestic gallery in most of the cases. For example, United Nations informal consultations were held on the 16th of August, and that too thanks to China, otherwise even that wasn't possible. And we presented that, those informal consultations as something big, historical thing happened in vis-a-vis Jammu and Kashmir. If you go down, go through the record of the UN meetings, you will not find a reference to this meeting because there is no outcome document of that meeting. So that was not meeting per se. Those were informal consultations to decide whether or not to have a meeting. But we presented that meeting or those consultations as something earth-shaking has happened vis-a-vis Jammu and Kashmir. Then you take the OIC contact group meeting, which meets almost twice a year on the sidelines of OIC meetings. And then again we presented those contact group meetings as something great happened vis-a-vis Kashmir. On the other hand, in March last year, For the first time in Pakistan's diplomatic history, Indian Foreign Minister was invited to an OIC Foreign Ministers Conference, and where she was allowed to speak. So, you can come up with many things, but the problem with Pakistan, unfortunately, is that we have not been able to define for ourselves, and I'm sorry to use this German word Zeitgeist, as to what is the spirit of our time, what problems Pakistan is facing, and how foreign policy, how our diplomacy can help solve those problems. Now, for example, we are very good at making statements, but I can tell you, and I can tell Mr. Haroon Shareef as well, given my own experience, there is hardly any emphasis on economic diplomacy in Pakistan. We give a damn. I have worked in missions, and I know, and I can give you my practical experiences, that there is simply no emphasis, no clarity as to how missions should be working to promote Pakistan's economic interests abroad. Then there is no focus on public diplomacy as to how to take our narrative across, how to promote our image abroad. You cannot do these things by making simple statements. And I'm being harsh and critical because, and let me say that, I have been critical when I was in the government as well. Hence, I was forced to take early retirement because I could not really, keep pace with these things. But Pakistan's foreign policy, in my view, we still do not have any clarity. Now, Kashmir is kind of, put on the back burner. All our focus is on Iran and Saudi Arabia and US. Where there is no reconciliation is required, we have jumped into that as if the situation has ratcheted up and there will be active hostility between the two countries. Even before our foreign minister left, we all knew that the situation is not escalating. And Pakistan, unfortunately, does not have that leverage, for heaven's sake, to play this role. You focus on your immediate priorities, your problems. And then you try to, and that is one problem which Pakistan has been facing, that we tend to punch above our weight, unfortunately. We think that we are a country of 200 million people, we are the Islamic country and the leader of the Muslim world. These are all delusional. And we need to come out of these delusions. If we want to, unless we are realistic, we are a big country, there is no doubt about that. Provided if we had learned from Germany as to how to go about things. We do not focus on our good governance at home, yet we want to achieve miracles on the diplomatic front. That is highly, highly unlikely to happen. First of all, we need to be realistic. Otherwise, you will continue saying, and we are very happy. Our media is full of stories on India these days. CAA, curfew in Jammu and Kashmir. And we feel very happy about these things. But let me assure you, and I am saying this on record, it's just a kind of fleeting phase. India knows what it is doing. Prime Minister Modi knows what is he up to. Unfortunately, we do not know as to what our long-term policy vis-a-vis India should be. That is the crux of the problem. I'm not saying that all is hunky-dory in India. There are serious problems they are facing. Still, despite Prime Minister Modi's big promises, their economy is facing serious issues, unemployment issues. 400 to 500 million people are still living below the poverty line. So there are serious issues India is facing. But let's not be, feeling happy about them as if all is well in Pakistan. India is no doubt a hostile country, and this hostility will continue for generations to come, in my view. And unless Kashmir problem is resolved fairly and justly, our hostility with India will remain there. And India will continue to damage Pakistan. My friend mentioned about our kind of fixation with India. And I think that is legitimate because we have seen India, how India has tried in the past to destabilize Pakistan through Afghanistan and especially to undermine us in Karachi, our commercial capital. So we are not fixated with India. My friend very rightly pointed out. In Pakistan, there is national consensus that we want to have a good relationship with India. But on the other hand, if you live in India, you do not find that consensus. People in India do not want to have a good relationship with Pakistan. They have kind of a consensus to damage Pakistan, undermine Pakistan. So here lies the difference. So our fixation with India is not unnatural because India has still not been able to digest the 1,000-year rule of Muslims in the subcontinent. And that perhaps is ingrained in them, for all times to come. So Pakistan will continue finding very difficult as to how to position itself, moving from geostrategic to geoeconomic issues. It's not that easy. It is easier said than done. But if we continue to be taking inconsistent steps, for example, I was one of those very few voices who opposed the Kartarpur corridor after 5th of August. Before that it was okay, but I was one who openly said that going ahead with this corridor makes no sense to me. If Kashmiris are Shairag, then so be it. Then we do not mind whether Christians like it or Sikhs likes it or like them or not. But we should be very clear. Now people in Pakistan are saying, oh, good government, tolerance, religious tourism, let the Sikhs come, let Hindus come to temples and enjoy, I am not an intolerant person. I have, traveled all over the world and I know India very well. So do not be carried away or get inveigled into a situation whereby you end up doing nothing for yourself. Hindu tourism is good, Sikh tourism is good, but what about these things are not done unilaterally? And these things will take you nowhere, I can assure you, because there are other important things which first need to be handled before you go down this road. Because there are serious complications, serious problems vis-a-vis India, Afghanistan, our relations with the US, now the EU, for example. The globalization has kind of integrated the world. But on the other hand, if you see, there is also fragmentation taking place. What is happening to European Union? Brexit is now living on the 30th of January. So on the other hand, on the one hand, whereas we can, take advantage of the opportunities unleashed by globalization. On the other hand, we need to be conscious of those tendencies which are dividing the people, dividing states, or weakening coalitions or regional organization. What happened to SARC for that matter? Now India is very cleverly focusing on sub-regional organizations. But that again was our own mistake. On the one hand, we talked about regional integration, connectivity. On the other hand, you are denying to India road access to Afghanistan. So who is to be, you need to be very clear about these things. We talk about holding the SARC summit here in Pakistan. I tell my people, why you are insisting on hosting a SARC summit in Pakistan when there is nothing on the table? First, you be clear as to what you can give to India, what you cannot. If there is no clarity, then you better not have these summits in Pakistan. Because as soon you talk about them, you invite pressure from outside. So diplomacy is a very kind of, delicate profession. You need to have absolute clarity as to where do you stand in terms of issues, in terms of your relations with the states. But unfortunately, I do not find. And then take the organizational capacity of a foreign office. Our missions, our foreign office, they are not well equipped. They do not have the wherewithal to handle the emerging serious challenges. But till very recently, our spokesperson was also the Director General of South Asia. He would deal with SAARC matters. He will deal with South Asian countries. How can you imagine a person dealing with all these challenges? One person. He is also the spokesperson as well. So it's mind-boggling for me as to how you can manage all these things. That only shows non-seriousness of purpose, nothing else. So if we are not serious about our diplomacy, our foreign policy objectives, rest assured we will continue be groping in the dark. We would not be achieving anything concrete. We will be making statements to keep Pakistani people in good humor. But beyond that, I do not see much really happening. And that pains me because I'm saying all these things with sadness, because I have been part of this institution, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and it is painful. It is no doubt painful. But let's hope that somebody would realize, the people like Mr. Haroon Shareef, who have access to the Prime Minister. I do not. So I'm a humble common man. So let's hope that things will get better.
Thank you, and thank you. Let me thank all our panelists for today, that Hippler, Mr. Haroon Shareef, and Ambassador Basit. And I just want to share with you, so we are working on Agenda 2047 at SDPI. So if you are interested in the long-term agenda, what we can do, so you can sit with SDPI for some day. 2047, so yeah. So thank you so much.